Intriguing, enthralling, and controversial are the words to describe the election that changed U.S. history. Necessary in order for Hayes to become president, the Compromise of 1877 created conflict in the South and compromised with the rights of African Americans. During this time, Ulysses S. Grant was president, and despite allegations of corruption and scandal that swirled around him at the end of his second term, he was eager to run again in 1876. However, scandal and the two-term tradition stopped him from moving forward with his desires. James G. Blaine of Maine emerged as the front-runner of Grant's Republican Party, but, like Grant and many of the other Republicans associated with his administration, scandal tainted Blaine as well. At the Republican Convention Center that year, the party put its hopes in the Ohio native Rutherford B. Hayes. 3 times elected as the governor of Ohio, he had made a name for himself as a civil service reformer. His greatest strength, however, was that he did not offend the radicals or the reformers. In St. Louis, at the Democratic Convention, there was little debate about who would be put forward as a candidate for president. Samuel Tilden, the millionaire, corporate lawyer, and reform-minded governor of New York, would be the choice. Tilden gained notoriety when he went after the infamous ring of Boss Tweed that controlled New York City politics through bribes and graft. The campaign of 1876 generated no burning issues. The main issues of the day centered around how to reconstruct and administer the South, as well as reforming civil service work. Both Hayes and Tilden favored conservative rule in the American South, and both favored civil service reform. With little substance to focus on, each camp turned to mudslinging. The Democrats aired the Republicans' dirty laundry, reminding voters of the scandals and corruption present during the Grant years. In response, the Republicans linked the Democrat Party with secessions and with the outrages committed against black and white Republicans in the South. Some Republican leaders went so far as to comment that every man who tried to rip apart the country was a Democrat, and reminded the public that Abraham Lincoln's assassin was a Democrat. And during this time, there was something called the Reconstruction happening, which was a period after the Civil War when the South reorganized its social, economic, and political systems to account for the end of slavery, and federal troops occupied the South. These troops served to guarantee African American men's right to vote, and the Republican-controlled federal government would only end the military occupation when states rewrote their constitutions to recognize the citizenship and voting rights of African American men. White Southerners generally despised these troops and wanted an end to the intervention of the federal government in the South. Northern troops were stationed in the South to ensure their rights, and with them there, the North could do nothing while they advocated for African American men's rights. During the election, Tilden of New York won 247,448 more popular votes than Hayes, but the electoral votes in the 3 southern states of Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina were disputed. While these states were being disputed, tensions remained high for nearly 4 months on who would be the next president. Finally, in January 1877, Congress established a 15-member electoral commission to resolve the issue of which candidate had won the contested states. The commission voted 8-7 along party lines to award the votes of all 3 states to Hayes. But even with these 3 states in favor of Hayes, Tilden still had a guaranteed spot in claiming presidency. But little did the country know what the 2 candidates were doing behind its back. As a partisan, Congressional Commission, which are formal groups established to provide independent advice, debated over the outcome early in 1877. Allies of the Republican Party candidate met in secret with moderate Southern Democrats in order to negotiate acceptance of Hayes's election. The Democrats agreed not to block Hayes's victory on the condition that Republicans withdraw all federal troops from the South, thus consolidating Democratic control over the region. In one of his speeches, Hayes had promised to protect the people of the South.
The permanent pacification of the country upon such principles and by such measures as will secure the complete protection of all its citizens in the free enjoyment of all their constitutional rights is now the one subject in our public affairs which all thoughtful and patriotic citizens regard as of supreme importance.
As a result of the so-called Compromise of 1877, Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina became Democratic once again, effectively marking the end of the Reconstruction era. While the North troops were stationed in the South, African Americans had their own rights, but with the Compromise and the North troops gone, they lost them. This created conflict because this meant that the North had just abandoned their fight for their rights by relinquishing in order to end Reconstruction and taking the spot for presidency. And with this came segregation and disenfranchisement laws known as Jim Crow, represented a formal codified system of racial apartheid that dominated the American South for 3/4 of a century. The laws affected almost every aspect of daily life, mandating creations of schools, parks, libraries, drinking fountains, restrooms, buses, trains, and restaurants. Whites only and colored signs were constant reminders of the enforced racial order. In legal theory, blacks received separate but equal treatment under the law, but in actuality, public facilities for blacks were nearly always inferior to those of whites, when they existed at all. In various states created requirements, literacy tests and poll taxes, and constitutional quizzes that were designed to keep blacks from registering to vote. But many poor Southern whites were at risk of also losing their rights because they could not have met such expectations. In addition, blacks were systematically denied the right to vote in most of the rural South, with the selective application of literacy tests and other racially motivated criteria. With this also came the Ku Klux Klan. From 1868 through the early 1870s, the Ku Klux Klan functioned as a loosely organized group of political and social terrorists. The Klan's goals included the political defeat of the Republican Party and the maintenance of absolute white supremacy in response to newly gained civil and political rights by Southern blacks after the Civil War. They were more successful in achieving their political goals than they were with their social goals during the Reconstruction era. And in Georgia, conservative whites, frustrated with their political failures during the 1876s, began to look for new ways to defeat their Republican enemies and control the recently enfranchised freed people. For many, the KKK and its public political wing, the Young Men's Democratic Clubs, offered a chance to take action. In February and March 1878, General Forrest visited Atlanta from Tennessee several times and met with the prominent Georgia conservatives. Forrest probably helped organize a statewide Klan structure during these visits. By the summer of 1878, the Klan was widespread across Georgia. Klan-like violence was also used to help control freed people's social behavior, but with less success. Black churches and schools were burned, teachers were attacked, and freed people who refused to show proper deference were beaten and killed. But they fought their attackers, rebuilt their churches and schools, and shot back during attacks on their communities. While these attacks surely terrorized some freed people, they failed to destroy the culture and social independence blacks had gained with emancipation. So the compromise, in result, ended with conflict.